Okay, welcome into the roundtable. I am Brad Wakai. That is Tyson Gentry. We are continuing our NFL divisional breakdowns today in our first AFC breakdown before the season starts, Tyson. We are doing the AFC South preview today. Not that exciting of a division. We're not going to lie. I think everybody out there who's a football fan knows it, but I think some interesting angles and some interesting teams that we have to discuss here today.
And this will be the last pod uh, that'll be released before No More Football because preseason football will hit. We're recording this on Tuesday. Preseason starts Friday. So this is the last one that we're going to record before we can really get in and watch, at least get a preliminary glance at a couple of these guys. Maybe not the team as a whole, but you can get a good read for practice squad guys who's going to make the roster. I mean, preseason gets crapped on, but I'm glad they cut it to 3 games, but it's fun.
Yeah, I'm glad they cut it to 3 as well. I think you get a better idea of who the teams are going to be and doesn't drag out as long too, which I'm very glad for. But the first team that we're going to start with, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they already had a preseason game, the Hall of Fame game against the Oakland Raiders, which they lost and looked pretty incompetent.
Vegas, you did it this time.
Oh, I did it this time. Wow, the Vegas Raiders. How about that?
Come on.
But definitely a new look for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. Last year going 3-14, Urban Meyer fired not halfway, but through some point in the season he was fired. Obviously did not make the playoffs. This was one of the worst teams in the NFL, or the worst team, picking number 1 in the draft. They bring in Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson brings in Press Taylor to be his offensive coordinator, 2 guys that we're very familiar with as Eagles fans. They bring over Mike Caldwell as the defensive coordinator here, bringing them over from the Tampa Bay Bucks. So Trevor Lawrence's second season, we kind of threw out that first one, although he wasn't very good in his rookie year. But with Urban Meyer there, not a lot of things went right for him, but completely different era for the Jacksonville Jaguars here.
And it's all about resetting the culture in Jacksonville with Doug Peterson. This is what he did in Philadelphia. He turned around a dumpster fire left behind by Chip Kelly, and he did it rather quickly. Jacksonville's hoping it can be the same thing. Second year was when he won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia. And that Eagles team had a lot more talent than this Jaguars team has on it right now, but the culture was set in year 1. It's just all going to boil down to how many excuses are we making for Trevor Lawrence because of the Urban Meyer stuff, because that was a circus.
Oh.
But he still played the games, and he still looked like how he looked in the games. And a lot of that probably had to do with the dysfunction, but there was some stuff that, Trevor Lawrence didn't quite look like the golden boy we were promised. I think we told people before the draft that we weren't buying into the hype like everybody else. And now I'm sitting on the other side of it, and I'm like, damn, I hope this guy's good.
Me too. Yeah, it's funny. I think both you and I were just like, hey, it's not going to click year 1 for Trevor Lawrence. Like, he's not going to come in and just be like, man, look at this guy. He's already leading the Jaguars to the playoffs. Like, we didn't think that was going to happen. One, because the team was so bad. And then now we're kind of on the other side. Everybody's like, oh, this guy stinks, man. 12 touchdowns, 17 picks, rookie year. He sucks. It's like, I don't know. I think he's going to be good. So as far as the rest of the roster besides Lawrence, losing DJ Chark, their receiver last year, Miles Jack's gone. They lost their 2 guards, Andrew Norwell and A.J. Cann, as well as Jacob Hollister, their tight end. But big offseason additions, bringing in Christian Kirk, broke the wide receiver market, as you've mentioned multiple times, Tyson. Bringing him in, Brandon Sheriff at offensive guard, which is a big signing. Paid a lot for these 2 defensive players. Fularunzo Fatukasi, D-line, and Foyosade Olukun as their linebacker. So a lot there. Evan Ingram, Zay Jones as receivers as well. More targets for Trevor Lawrence. And then Trayvon Walker, their first overall draft pick. Devin Lloyd, who they traded up to get in the first round, linebacker to Utah. And then getting Chad Muma, linebacker in the 3rd round, and Snoop Conner, running back from Ole Miss. So a lot to play with, a lot of new faces here for the Jags. Just kind of give me your overview before we get to best case, worst case.
Well, first of all, I think that's kind of insane that you just ran through 10, 11, 12 guys right there that are all going to make the 53. Everybody that you just named is going to be on this team over somebody that was there a year ago. We talk about setting that culture. This is like how you do it. Everybody else is out of the building. Like the team that took last 2 years in a row, we can't afford for this to happen. Get a guy in here with Super Bowl pedigree. But it's going to boil down to really like how well does the Trevor Lawrence, Doug Peterson connection go? And how much improved is the offensive line and the defensive line with guys are bringing in, guys are losing year over year because the Jaguars have just been punished in the trenches season after season. And last year it was a little bit of improvement on the offensive end with some regard to rushing the football. But even then, right, like there's a lot to be desired there. I think James Robinson's, if his Achilles is fine, I think Doug Peterson is going to frustrate a lot of fantasy football managers and do what he did in Philly. And Travis Etienne is going to be I think we might be left wondering, like, how good is this guy really? Because that's what Doug Peterson seems to do to these unicorn-type players, is kind of miscast. We had that a few times in Philadelphia, if you remember, Brad.
Absolutely.
But there's a whole bunch of new faces here. And so, for me, I think the broad overview is, like, Jacksonville is – we don't have league pass teams in the NFL, but you got to be watching the Jags.
Yeah, in best-case scenario, I think for the Jags, for me, is, Trevor Lawrence can play. Yeah, that's – number 1 overall draft pick, ideally, is your franchise quarterback. If he can play and he shows market improvement where he looks comfortable, he makes throws and lessens his mistakes that we saw a lot in his rookie season, I think that's the best case scenario for this season, as well as turning around the culture there. Not having a defeatist attitude, actually having people try and care, and it seemed like it's a grown-up professional locker room there. 2-4 in one-score games last year, that does not bode well for how the culture is. I mean, kind of better than you thought, but we're losing a lot of games at halftime.
Wasn't one of those 2-4 games against the Bills?
Yeah, we won 9-6.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, they beat them 9-6. So negative 20 in turnover margin too, Tyson. So if that improves, this is going to be a better team. But best case for me, I'm not even talking about record, is Trevor Lawrence looks like he can play the quarterback position in the National Football League. Yeah,
if Trevor Lawrence takes this next step, then it doesn't really matter. Everything else is everything else at that point. Then you have your guy. You can start selling, free agents. Hey, come play in Jacksonville. Look what we got growing down here. We got Trevor Lawrence, rookie contract. But we've seen this with the Jags before, where these guys just kind of go there to die. And I think, for me, best case scenario, Trevor Lawrence takes that next step. Worst case scenario is, and I'm going to say this in a way that sounds weird here, but worst case scenario is he gets a little bit better. Not worse or stay the same, but if he gets a little bit better and they're sitting at picking 6 in the draft and they're adding somebody else who probably doesn't impact winning right away, and then Trevor Lawrence is just that guy, you pissed away 3 years again. You caused the circus for nothing. Now you're burning it down again. So I think a lot of people are looking at Trevor Lawrence like he has to make this huge jump. But if he doesn't, and he just gets a little better, like if he has 15 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, he keeps the job next year, going into year 3. Daniel Jones has a job.
He's going to keep his job, I think, through this contract. I mean,
it's just,
they're just going to hope and pray, that all they're going to do. Imagine being the guys that gave up on Trevor Lawrence and he goes to another program or another team and he actually looks great. Now the Jaguars look even more like idiots. The owner's pissed because he's like, I didn't want to make this decision. Everybody gets fired. It's a restart in Jacksonville again, and it's Groundhog's Day, and you're looking for another quarterback. I agree with you. I mean, worst case scenario is you don't really know what you have with any of these players on the roster. Trayvon Walker looks like just a guy like he did in college. Trevor Lawrence, like you said, there's some improvements here. There's some flash, but there's also stupid mistakes. We don't really know what we have in him yet. Christian Kirk, hit or miss like he's been all of his career. It's like, well, that wasn't a great signing. Maybe we can cut him, or doesn't stand out. Mine says there's continued question marks around this roster. They've continued to pay crazy money. I think since 2014, they spent $1.6 billion. And if you don't have a resolution on any of those guys that you brought in for that much money, that's the worst case scenario for me, that you don't know if there's any cornerstones you can build around here.
That London money has to be paying good.
That's what they're hoping for.
That's crazy.
Realistic expectations for you, Tyson, for where you think the Jags are going to go?
Realistically, I do think Trevor Lawrence gets better this year. I know I just kind of went in the other direction there, but I think he gets better. And this was my issue pre-draft, I don't think he's ever going to be Peyton Manning or any of these guys that he was billed to be in the come-up. But that doesn't mean that Trevor Lawrence can't be better than Kirk Cousins or somebody like that. And I'm not saying that to disparage Kirk Cousins. I think Kirk Cousins is probably, that's the line, right? That's what we were talking about a couple episodes ago. Like if Trevor Lawrence is Derek Carr, then, you're happy in Jacksonville. But if he can get there this year, that's awesome. I don't think he'll reach that level, but I think next year we can be talking about Jacksonville as a place people want to play because Trevor Lawrence looks like the real deal. And he doesn't even have to – I'm not talking about stats or any of that stuff. I don't care so much about that, but he made stupid decisions last year. He looked a little lost at times, which, again, very well could have been a product of what the heck was going on in the locker room. And after the games and at the bars when you don't fly home with your team from Cincinnati, fuck you, Urban Meyer. So I think realistically, Trevor Lawrence takes that next step, and Jacksonville all of a sudden, like, this division is on the decline all the way around. Indianapolis is kind of band-aiding themselves with quarterback year over year. Jacksonville could be in a good spot.
Yeah, realistically for me, I think there will be improved from last year. And this time I am talking record-wise. You know, we said best case, worst case. We're not doing record. I think for me, I'm expecting 5 wins for them, which I think would be good. And Trevor Lawrence looked better, but I mean, they do have the 12th easiest schedule based on the win total projections. You know, you'd expect that from a last place team, expect that from a team with the number 1 overall pick and the worst record last year. But that's basically all the expectations I have. And I think what you can realistically expect, I know there's some things thrown around. Division winner, wow, they're going to be awesome. I have no expectations regarding that for the Jags. And we'll get into that when we do our gambling shows and more deep dive into exactly all the win totals and things. But realistically for me, this is going to be a better football team, a more professional football team. And I don't think they're going to look outmanned, overmatched, outcoached every single Sunday like we saw last year.
Every Sunday but one, baby, when they beat the Bills.
Yeah, well, they beat the Dolphins in London too. They looked good there, and then the wheels fell off. Tennessee Titans. Now, interesting team, I think, going into the season this year. Number 1 overall seed in the AFC last year, 12-5. They lost 16-19 to the Bengals in the divisional round on 3 interceptions from Ryan Tannehill that he said he had to go to therapy for. You know, Mike Vrabel's back for this 5th season. Todd Downing returns in his 2nd season, and Tannehill's entering his 4th season here as the Titans, although they have drafted his replacement in Malik Willis. Now, last year they were 6-2 in one-score games, 6-1 in field goal games, which is pretty remarkable. In the past couple, they've had those records. Past couple seasons, they've had those records. Titans have an interesting outlook, I think, when you have like a broad look at where they are at roster-wise and decisions that the front office have made. Tyson, going into this season, give me your thoughts on the Titans.
The Titans, to me, feel – this is just came to my head, but it sounds weird. They feel like the early 2010s Pacers, where, like, we know and they probably know that they're not going to win a title, but they have, you know, Derrick Henry is a monster. The defense was really good a year ago, and so they're just kind of, like, hoping that this thing works. But we were talking pre-show. I think the window slammed shut on them realistically a year ago, but ultimately getting rid of A.J. Brown, I think, is going to be the thing that does this offense in. And you can go look and say, well, the offense did this when he did play and this when he didn't play. And it's pretty close. And okay, like Derrick Henry just broke his foot. Ryan Tannehill showed us he's Ryan Tannehill again. Treylon Burks is running with the 2s and the 3s. I know it's camp, but you lost all pro level wide receiver, not somebody that's learning how to play the offense on the fly. So to me, like, this window is shut, and I think that we're going to watch the slow death of the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, you mentioned A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, who they lost, but also Janoris Jenkins, who was a big part of turning around that defense last year. Dante Foreman, the running back who backed up Derrick Henry, he went left in free agency. Rashawn Evans, their linebacker, who was awesome last year, as well as Jayon Brown, both gone. Did add Robert Woods, wide receiver, but, he's coming off in the injury. So, how explosive, how effective is he going to be? Did add Austin Hooper at tight end as well. But, comparatively, there is a major lack of talent to what they had last year, even with the draft picks that they've gotten. So I think best case scenario for me, obviously, is they continue to win this division and make the playoffs as a division winner. I don't expect them to be an AFC number 1 seed in the AFC like they were last year. I just don't see that possible, but it is Mike Vrabel who's gone over his win total. I believe every single year he's been the head coach of the Titans. So he is an effective leader and an effective coach at winning football games in this league. Best case for me, though, they continue on the Titans path that they have, outperform expectations, and win the division again and make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's 100% where they are. I'll throw in like absolute best case is Derrick Henry is actually just that guy and gets back to 1,800 yards or 2,000. Whatever pace he was on last year is just like there's no way. I don't know if that'll ever happen again. The guy was going to rush for 4,000 yards. But if Derrick Henry, if he gets back to 1,800 yards, it doesn't really matter much who Ryan Tannehill's throwing the ball to. We've seen that before. I just don't think that's the realistic option. That's why I think best case is winning the division. But for me, the worst case scenario for Tennessee is maybe Derrick Henry is like everybody else and might not recover from that broken foot. He looked like he came back a little bit too early in that playoff game. And maybe that was just shaking the rust off or whatever. Maybe he's fine. But I'm going to go with what my eyes tell me, what history tells me. When you're that big and you break your foot, it's tough to come back to the level that you were at before. All the losses on defense compound themselves, and they really, really miss A.J. Brown. And this team is staring at like 6 wins at the end of the year, which to me doesn't sound crazy, but we're talking about the team that won the AFC in the regular season a year ago.
Yeah. I mean, worst case for me, too, is similar to along those lines. You know, Henry becomes mortal. He gets banged up, and then you have to rely on a rookie in Hassan Haskins, who they drafted to replace him and supplement that. And then Ryan Tannehill continues to drop off, and then you're left with Malik Willis. We're not going to see anything of him this year unless Tannehill gets hurt. But then if you do turn over the keys to Malik Willis and he's not the guy, I mean, forget slow death, like you mentioned. I mean, you may be coming to a screeching halt, and the Titans are once again searching with a roster that they wanted to have in win now mode. So that's the worst case. Everything, the wheels fall off and the car looks all nice, but then you got to replace it with things that are continue to keep this moving. It just doesn't work out for them. So I guess realistically for me, what I do expect, and I kind of alluded to, I actually think they're going to miss the playoffs. I don't think they're going to win this division. We'll talk about the team in a bit who I think will. But I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year. Even if Derrick Henry's awesome, I do think they're just so limited in terms of having Robert Woods as your receiver, Nikina Westbrook, and then relying on the rookie Treylon Burks. I don't see it with this team. I think the defense is going to take a step back, and I think the offensive line got worse, and they already had a -4 sack margin last year, and that was the best defense they've had in a while. So I see a lot of regression coming, especially considering their 6-2 in one-score games last year, Mark, and 6-1 in field goal games even. So I'm expecting complete regression here.
I'm looking at this team as like an 8 or 9 win team, hovering right around that 500 mark. Realistically, I expect Treylon Burks to flash a couple times this year to let everybody know, like, he's a special athlete when he gets going. His combine numbers don't show that, but go watch him run away from guys when he's playing Alabama. I don't care if they ran a 4.5 at the 40. Nobody there could catch him, so I think he'll be fine. I think Kyle Phillips, another wide receiver that they drafted, could end up flashing for the offense as well. And then, maybe we're talking about this team in a more favorable light, but I think the Titans are on paper average. And maybe Mike Vrabel brings them a game or two above average just because he's a great coach. But there's a real world where, like, this thing falls apart, and I think that's a lot closer to them repeating as AFC champs regular season.
Okay, Houston Texans time here. Now, hired Lovie Smith to take over after firing David Coley after one season. They did go 4-13. Davis Mills was their quarterback, replacing Tyrod Taylor. He looked good in moments, and especially down the stretch. I think he did lead all rookies in 300-yard passing games. So there were some big moments for him last year. But Pep Hamilton, they bring him in as their OC. He was the passing game coordinator last year. Previously had spent time in the XFL as a head coach. And Lovie Smith's going to continue to call defensive plays here. There were 0-4 in one-score games last year, 0-2 in field goal games, -12 sack margin. Obviously losing Deshaun Watson, who sat out, but David Johnson's gone. Is that a plus or a minus? He was bad for them. Justin Reed, safety. I do think that's a big loss, along with Eric Wilson at linebacker and AJ Moore, who are now gone, and especially Marcus Cannon at tackle, who, you lose that. Don't necessarily bring anybody in to replace him who's game ready right now, and you already have a negative sack margin. So I think that is difficult. But Tyson, your thoughts on the Texans as we get ready for the season?
Everything we just said about the Jaguars, it applies to the Texans, but to a lesser degree. Like, the Texans' ceiling is lower, and their floor is worst team in the league. but they're the same. They have kind of the same thing going on, where we're trying to figure out what we have here. Maybe Davis Mills. We were talking pre-show, like Davis Mills was as impressive as just about everybody else in his rookie class in year one, especially for the situation that he found himself thrown into. Was a little bit more stressful than everybody else walking in these first round jobs. I thought he performed pretty admirably. I think Houston wants to see what they have, because I think that Davis Mills last year, to me at least, looked like there might be a place for him in the NFL. Probably only on Houston, but it sure looked like he could be a quarterback somewhere. And I like Lovie Smith. It's trying to reset that culture. Pep Hamilton, you're trying to reset that culture, bring in a whole bunch of new faces. And the one thing about the Texans, all the way across the board, except for running back for some reason, but they're young, right? Like they bring in Dameon Pierce at running back, but the rest of that room is like 40 years old on average, I swear. But they're trying to reset this thing because they're recovering. I don't even know if that's the word, but the Deshaun Watson thing took a hit on the entire organization. I'm sure that wasn't easy to navigate on the day-to-day. And so now it's like we're free from that situation. Let's take a look, see what we have. We have Lovie Smith, who we think can be the guy for the future. If him and Davis Mills works, we're in a great spot. If not, we got tons of capital to play with.
Yeah, exactly. I think best case for me along those lines is Nick Caserio hits a home run in his draft class. Derek Stingley looks like the dude we saw his freshman year at LSU. Kenyon Green, who they drafted in the first round at guard, he can play. And you're like, okay, we can start building an O-line. We have at least one piece here. Obviously, Laramie Tunsil's there, but he's getting a little older. Jalen Petrie, the safety they got from Baylor, that dude can play, he kind of fits the new mold in the NFL. John Mechie, receiver from Bama, leukemia, that's just a sad story. So we hope he recovers from that along with his torn ACL. So really, he's really been going through it. Feel bad for John Mechie. But Christian Harris, linebacker from Bama, culture setter, guy from, that Nick Caserio wanted in there. Obviously, the connection with the Patriots, Bill Belichick and Saban, bringing Bama guys. I think you're going to have a pretty good opportunity. But Jerry Hughes, culture guy. Steven Nelson, culture guy. These are all players they added. Mario Addison, culture guy, bringing in some veterans. And like you said, seeing if this thing can shift in the right direction for him. So best case, this thing gets improved and the draft class looks good and Davis Mills flashes.
100%. Like that's exactly what I was going to say. I think one thing that I would add to that, and I know this doesn't really fit the mold, but I think Dameon Pierce probably finishes this year with the second most rushing yards of any rookie. I really like Breece Hall in New York, but I think Dameon Pierce is pro ready, and I think that room is weak. So we'll get into it in the betting show, but I think Dameon Pierce has a shot to hit the overs on a lot of his props.
All right. Worst case for you as we get into the Texans. I think
they suck.
We have an idea.
The worst team in the league. No, we were talking pre-show because that's easy, right? If they're the worst team in the league, that's not worst case. You get a re-roll. You get C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young or whoever you want.
Maybe it's best case.
Yeah, and if they win 4 or 5 games like they did a year ago, and they're picking kind of outside that quarterback range, and we don't really know exactly what we were saying with the Jaguars. Like, if we can't find anything out this year, it's kind of a lost cause, especially if we can't bring in blue chippers at quarterback. I think C.J. Stroud is a really, really good prospect. I think we're going to see some fighting for him towards the end of the regular season here. I think people are going to be rushing to the bottom of the standings, and maybe Houston is a little bit too good too early on to get to the bottom of those standings.
Yeah, that's definitely the worst case scenario is if Davis Mills isn't good enough where you're like, he's our franchise guy. Boom, we have our quarterback. And now we just have to continue to draft other people and bring in other free agents. But he wins just enough games, 5 to 6, and you're missing out on Stroud or Young or hell. I mean, Levis, that name's been thrown around. Will Levis out of Kentucky. You miss out on some of these guys in there, and you're stuck with the guy you're not that sold on. But you missed out on another generational talent. That's the worst case scenario for me. Realistically, Tyson, what do you see in the Houston Texans?
I think realistically, Davis Mills isn't as good as we want to believe or we want to think he is. I think a lot of those games late in the year, Houston was just airing the shit out of the football because they couldn't run the football. They were losing every game by 40. Granted, they beat good teams. Like, he beat the Chargers. He had a couple good wins on the resume last year. But in his 13 games, he averaged like 200 passing yards, 205 passing yards, something like that. Nothing eye-popping that happened the entire time, hardly, except for when you looked up at the final stat lines at the end of the game. It was like, holy, Davis Mills just threw for 320.
Right.
But watching the games, it didn't really look like a guy that was throwing for 320 yards. I think realistically, he's probably closer to backup status than he is as a starting quarterback in the NFL. I would love to be wrong. I would love nothing more than if Davis Mills was the best quarterback from this hyped-up all-time quarterback draft class. It was just the long-neck guy from Stanford. That would be amazing. But I don't think that's the case.
Realistically, for me, I see them being definitely a top 5 worst team in the league. And we've gone over a couple different previews, and there's a couple other teams we have to get to that I think are going to be worse than the Texans this year, but one of them being the Falcons. So I think the Falcons are definitely in the race for the worst team. Now, if Ritter flashes, if he's able to play, what do they do with that pick? Maybe you can jump up and get to that spot. But regardless, what I'm expecting from the Texans this year is a little better coaching from Lovie Smith, a little more competent offensively. I think David Coley, we know he was going to be a nice guy, and this is his opportunity. I do think for them to win 4 games last year was impressive. I was surprised they fired him. But Lovie Smith wasn't great at the Big Ten, so how's he going to be in the NFL again in this new age? They're going to be a bad team. How bad? I actually don't really know yet. We'll touch on it in the betting show in terms of what we want to do with angles and things like that and how we want to play them on a game-to-game basis, week-to-week basis. But I do think they're actually going to have some wins this year, and I think they may shock some people like they did as well.
What would be shocking for the Texans to win, I guess, is what I'm trying to run through my head.
Shock teams were like, what? They beat them?
Oh, I got you. I thought you meant maybe they could roll off like 9 wins or something.
If they roll off 9 wins, dude, Lovie Smith better be fucking coach of the year.
That would be shocking.
Indianapolis Colts to close this baby out. Now, I kind of alluded to it. I think they're going to win the division, so I'm just going to get that out front right now. Frank Reich in his 5th season here. They went 9-8 last year, just missed out in the playoffs because they couldn't beat the Jaguars. They haven't won there in like 5 games, which is insane. They bring over Matt Ryan. Obviously lost Matt Eberflus, their defensive coordinator, to the Chicago Bears head coaching position. They bring in Gus Bradley, which I'm not high on at all. I think that guy stinks, but we'll see what happens. But Matt Ryan, could be an upgrade at quarterback. Definitely is an upgrade over Carson Wentz for what Frank Reich wants to do in this offense. But they lost Eric Fisher, tackle, Mark Galinsky, offensive guard. He's out of there. Rock Ya-Sin, the cornerback's out. George Odom, safety, and Xavier Rhodes, corner, all gone here. But do bring in Yannick Ngakoue to be their edge rusher, Stephon Gilmore at corner, Rodney McLeod at safety, Dennis Kelly at tackle. They're going for this thing, I think, when you look at the additions that Chris Ballard has made on this roster. And I want to point this out real quick, Tyson. They went 2-5 in one-score games last year and 0-3 in field goal games. I think that can be improved with a Matt Ryan, who I know some people think is over the hill, but I think he may have just enough left in that old tank to get them to the playoffs and win this division.
I'm curious where this offense is going to go. Matt Ryan loves to dump the ball off, and that Frank Reich doesn't mind having the ball thrown to his running backs clearly, right? If you go look at his resume, Carson Wentz doesn't dump the ball off. So maybe we were hamstringed there on seeing the full potential of this offense. Outside of Michael Pittman, there's a lot of ifs at the wide receiver position, right? We have Paris Campbell, maybe, right? We've been saying it with this guy for 4 years now, maybe. Alec Pierce, physical monster, maybe. Like he might flame out as well. So you run down the list of pass catchers here. Mo Alley Cox, right? They draft like Kyle Granson and all these guys, but Mo Alley Cox is probably going to win the job at tight end because that's how tight end works. It's a really hard position to learn unless you're going to play outside like Kyle Pitts. You generally don't put up insane numbers year one. I just think that this team is going to be a better version of the team than they were last year, but I think a lot of people are putting some pretty unrealistic expectations on the Colts. Like when I see people putting out that, like, don't sleep on them to make the AFC title game or don't sleep on them to make the second round play. I'm like, look at the rest of the conference. Point out 6 teams that the Colts could beat that you're sure of. in a playoff game. And that's where I'm at with this team. I think they're going to be better in the regular season because Frank Reich's a great coach. They're incredibly talented. Jonathan Taylor is probably the best running back in football. That's a huge relief. Nyheim Hines should be healthy. The defense definitely got better. But are they better than any team in the AFC West?
Right, and the best case in this scenario is they look really good with Matt Ryan at quarterback, like really good, and everything clicks together. They were a good team last year, and then he adds 3 more wins, and they're potentially competing for the top seed in the AFC. They have the third easiest schedule this year based on win total projection, so that's something they can go through. That's really the only best case I can see. I'm already expecting them to win the division. Best case is that they just take this thing to the next level.
And there's a real world where best case everybody else cannibalizes each other. They run off 5 in the division and they are the 1 seed at the end of the year. I think that is best case scenario. I was saying to you before we started that it feels like in the AFC South, whoever wins the division always has an inflated record and gets punched in the face come playoff time. And I just best case to me is maybe second round of the playoffs for the Colts. I just don't see anything more with this team.
Yeah, worst case for me, this would be a disaster if they missed the playoffs. I think if they missed the playoffs here, I think it'd be hard to justify firing Frank Reich, although apparently there's some local media people who are like, he sucks. It's like, he's had 5 different quarterbacks in his 5 seasons he's been head coach. Like, go fuck off. Like, you do that, pal. Like, you couldn't handle having 5 different bosses. Like, this guy's got 5 different franchise quarterbacks. Like, give me a break with that. And they've won and made the playoffs. Like, come on. So worst case is missing the playoffs completely. And then you're like, what do we do here? Because if we just miss the playoffs like we did last year, we can't get a franchise QB. Maybe we trade up to get him. Maybe we have to trade some capital. But that's something down the line. Worst case for me is like, hey, we went all in terms of an upgrade here, and we still weren't good enough in the AFC to make the playoffs. That's a disaster.
I don't really know if I can talk myself into a world where they don't make the playoffs, though. Because I do agree that would be worst case. It's just, I guess worst case maybe would be second in the division. But with their schedule, and it's tough to see. And I guess second place in the division does miss the playoffs. But outside of injury, this is a playoff team. It's just, I think their ceiling is the floor.
Yeah, and I think that's why realistically, it's kind of like what we expect here. I expect them to make the playoffs. When they get to the playoffs, I don't expect them to go far in the playoffs because they don't quite have that top-end talent that the Chiefs do, the Bills do, the Bengals do, the Ravens do, yada, 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 go down the list. Whoever makes it. Broncos maybe, Chargers maybe, Patriots if they get back there, with Belichick at coach. Just go through your whole litany here. We got to see who actually ends up. But if the Colts make it, I think that they're substantially lacking in positions that I think other teams will be better than them in, and that's what's going to hinder them.
And the Colts difference makers aren't at the same high impact positions that all those teams that you just named, right? Darius Leonard's a monster, but very few times, the middle linebackers make the play that defines the game. Maybe he's calling out a coverage or forcing a fumble because that's just who he is. But Jonathan Taylor can win you a game, but can he win you a playoff game by himself? I don't think so. Right? You run down the list. A lot of really good players, but they just kind of outside of Darius Leonard, there's not a game breaker, and him having to play middle linebacker because that's his position kind of hinders his ability to break games. And so I think realistically they're going to be a playoff team, and maybe they win a game in the playoffs, but I don't see it. They did all this to stay the same.
That's going to do it for our AFC South preview. If you haven't listened to our other previews in the NFL, we have the NFC South out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We also have our NFC West preview out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. So go check those out. We also, if you're a college football fan, have done our ACC conference preview along with our picks. What do we expect to happen this year in the ACC? We have our win totals out. We also have our conference champion prediction as well. And then just released our Pac-12 conference preview and picks. Same thing, win totals that we have. Tyson and I are against each other for who we think is going to win the conference. So go check that out. But we're pretty much aligned on different win totals across the board there. So go check that out for sure.
Anything about you picking the team that won 4 games. I can't change that. That's what happened.
Hey, got to go find out. I'm telling you, there were 2 teams last year that sucked, and I think they're going to be pretty good this year. But in the meantime, Instagram @ the Roundtable Pod _ TikTok @ the Roundtable Pod _ and Twitter @TRT _pod. Check us out there. Interact with us as we get closer and closer to football season. We're going to have a lot more content out, a lot more gambling stuff, and we're going to have player props and all that. And I know, Tyson, you're excited for that.
I'm pumped. And sad to see Cam Smith go to Live.
Sad to see it. We'll see if there's any other movement if we get ready for the playoffs in golf here, actually. And hopefully there's not as much movement after the season, but I'm not too bullish on that, Tyson. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
All right. Next week, we'll be back with another divisional preview. AFC West potentially, AFC North potentially. Stay tuned. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple so you don't miss a single upload that we have. Until next time, peace.